Hi, Sally and Leanne. How are you today?
Good, thank you.
Good. You're calling in from Auckland, are you?
Yes.
Excellent, excellent. What's the weather like up there today?
Well, I was just going to say we're in a windowless room, so, well, there is a window, but not to the outside. So who knows? It changes every half hour at the moment, so I don't know what it's doing right now.
We've got,
I think. Yeah.
oh, it's a lovely day here in Wellington, but we do have roadworks outside that are making quite a lot of noise. So we've got 17 people on board at the moment. So welcome to the 17 of you that are here. Thank you for being nice and early. We're going to wait another couple of minutes and then start straight away. So looking like, I'm just looking at the names of the people that we've got here. We've got people from all over the country, which is wonderful. These webinars enable people from quite remote areas to join in and keep up to date, which is fabulous in comparison to have to get on a plane and join together. So COVID has had some huge benefits, hasn't it?
It has, and I think we're all getting, well, I like to say we're all getting familiar with this technology, but sometimes it still does throw you out a bit.
It does, yes. Yeah, we're certainly learning as well. I'm just going to share my screen here. Can you see my screen there?
Yes.
Excellent. So we've got a couple more minutes. Did you receive your copies of the booklet in the post?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, lovely. So we had
fantastic.
Very limited copies of these made, and a large portion of them are going to politicians and people that we think will value them. The rest of it is on the website. We've done quite a lot of media coverage as well, and as yet haven't heard a lot back from the media, but hopefully we'll follow all of that up. We've sent maybe, I don't know, 200-300 individual emails out to people as well. So there's been quite a communication plan around this process.
Alison, we were using it just the other day for a submission to FSANZ, so it's already in use.
Oh, how fabulous. What was the submission on, Leanne?
It's on the FSANZ Act review.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we were just using some of the statistics out of it, so it was great.
Yeah,
great to have it in one place.
Yeah, I only had to look in one document, not many.
Excellent, excellent. I'm pleased to hear that it has been of value so far. So let's make a start. It's 12 o'clock, and thank you for those of you that are joining in this morning on our ANA webinar. Tēnā koutou, and welcome to our series of 3 webinars discussing our fabulous document that has been almost a year in gestation, Kawea Aotearoa, enabling everyone in Aotearoa to eat well. So there's a bit of a background to this document. There's been a rich amount of information in these papers, and these webinars are designed to create dialogue and to help influence change. We don't pretend to have all of the answers, but what we have done is put the evidence together for you to use. Today's webinar, there'll be questions and answers from the authors on the suite of 3 papers that we have. Next week we have Leanne and Sally, the main authors, back again to talk about the key findings of the papers, and the third webinar, Jeff Kerr discusses his area of expertise. So why did ANA create these documents? Let's just change the slide there. That's So ANA funded these documents out of its own resources, and every year we do an advocacy-based project. So creating evidence for you that you can use and to have influence and impact. ANA advocates for, promotes, and really wants the best nutritional health of the New Zealand population, and we do that by supporting the community and the public health workforce. That's totally our business. At ANA, we're often asked what the nutritional status of the population is, and really, apart from knowing a lot about our growing obesity rates, we really weren't able to answer the question based on evidence. As an evidence-based organisation, we found it difficult to find the information in one place. And so we're just thrilled to have a one-stop shop with documenting the nutritional status of New Zealanders in 2020. The aim of this snapshot was to summarise the population health nutrition related issues. We're pleased that this paper aims to inform without making judgment, and certainly we have made a purposeful decision not to go into suggesting solutions. You might note that sometimes I personally change the term public health and population health. My preference is to use the term population health because I do find that people get a bit muddled between the public health system and public health. That's why I tend to use population health. Others of you may have a different view. So just moving on to the next slide. This seems to, there we go. You will see, all of you hopefully have had a look at the papers, and you'll see that there are 3 separate papers in there, and we've used this upside down triangle to identify each paper. And I'd like to identify or explain the process that we went through to create these papers. It has taken us close to a year, about 11 months. So we've had a lot of resource dedicated to the papers. I initially met with Jeff Kura from Massey University to seek his advice on on making sure that we did follow a correct and proper process. A lot of his advice has been taken through the papers, and you'll hear from Jeff in the 3rd webinar, but he recommended that we start with social determinants of health and food security. And if you get that right, he said, then the rest of nutrition falls into place. I then met with both Leanne and Sally. They both have extensive public health backgrounds. Both PhDs in nutrition, have strong research backgrounds, and are highly valued members of the public health team. They agreed to help out with the research. So we created a brief, a budget, a timeline. They did the research, we did the writing, and probably here comes the crux. We sent it out for peer review. It came back with a lot of comments, very constructive comments, and it went for a rewrite, and we sent it out for another peer review. The peer review process was very robust, and once we were all happy with the papers, the ANA board signed off. We had it edited, proofread, laid out, graphic designed. We've got a communication and dissemination plan and discussion. So the discussion is part of why we're here today. Once the papers came back from the first peer review, it was really unanimous that there was just so much information, very rich information in these papers, but it actually was a little bit overwhelming. And so that's why it was created into 3 separate papers. These papers can stand alone, or they can be read in conjunction with the other papers. So the research that has been done strongly confirms that the socio-economic determinants of health and the impact of these have an enormous impact on the nutritional status of individuals in New Zealand. That's why we have used the upside down triangle in our imagery to highlight the importance of getting the basics in place. Affordable housing, adequate incomes, the list goes on. If people have their basic needs met, then nutrition shouldn't be an issue. But at present, as you know, housing, rental costs, they're taking the majority of people's incomes and leaving insufficient resources for affordable foods. So you may wonder why the paper doesn't focus so much on obesity. And I'm needing to change the slide. Here we go. So nutrition is so much greater than obesity, and we're probably talking to the converted here, that obesity is just the tip of the iceberg, and we wanted to explore the issues sitting underneath the tip, issues that may be topical in the future. We initially identified 25 health issues for consideration. Some of these have been addressed in separate papers, and some of you will be familiar with the prevention of dementia paper and the role of nutrition in healthy brains. They were bits of offshoots of this paper. We have really high rates of obesity in Aotearoa, and we're also seeing increasing rates of malnutrition, especially with our ageing population. We've got more long-term conditions diagnosed at younger and younger ages, and just think of type 2 diabetes in children, just so wasn't seen 30 years ago. We're seeing high rates of dental disease, gum disease, and all of this really has an impact on what people are able to eat. They just simply can't eat whole grain foods, fruits and vegetables if they don't have proper gums and well functioning gums and teeth. A number of the issues that we saw had very common factors. So we also found evidence that environmental issues, including access to fresh, safe drinking water, were fundamental to public health. Food security, wider determinants of health was a common thread with every single issue influencing nutrition. In the last slide here, I have ANA's call to action. Firstly, we want to see an investment in nutrition, and ANA believes that a national nutrition strategy will be key to us all working towards a similar goal. At present, nutrition in Aotearoa is fragmented across the country. There are many nutrition-related issues that require urgent attention to prevent long-term costs, and these costs go well beyond the health sector. And secondly, our call is what gets measured gets managed, and it's really shocking that we don't know what adults and children are eating. So this leads to our call for a nutrition strategy, a national nutrition strategy. So it is my great pleasure today to introduce the two main authors of the paper, Dr. Leanne Young and Dr. Sally Mackay. These two people are probably well known to you. They both have PhDs in public health nutrition, and I'm going to start a few questions for the authors. I'll stop sharing my screen here, and hopefully the authors will pop back up. Kia ora to you both.
Kia ora koutou.
Yeah, kia ora koutou, Alison.
Welcome, and thank you so much for the efforts that you've put into our papers. This is just such a relief to have this printed and to be in the communication and dissemination phase. Just for those of you that have joined us this morning and are on the webinar, if you've got any questions at all, please use the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. We will have time to answer questions, but Sally and Leanne will be back next week as well, and we'll cover any questions then that we haven't managed to get through today. This is a bit of a panel question and answer, and I wonder if I could start with you, Sally. Could you just tell us a little bit about how you got started on this project? It seems so big and there's so much. Where did you start?
Well, it is a really big project, and we, of course, had a lot of liaison with you, Alison, about what topics we would include. So we used our experience in the sector to be able to sort of tease out which were the important issues. We've been working as public health nutritionists for quite a long time, and so we did already have an awareness of where the gaps were, and so we could bring this together in the document, which we really hope will be useful for advocacy purposes for the sector.
Thank you. And I guess some people will be wondering why there's some issues that are missing. If those of you that have read the papers probably think, oh, they haven't mentioned this, they haven't mentioned that. And I guess it's been impossible to cover everything that we would have liked to have covered. How did you make the decision on what to leave out or probably what to put in?
As Sally has said, we worked with you, Alison, at ANA to prioritise topics, and I guess that we also didn't want the final document to be too onerous, so it was very much a case of trying to prioritise and see what were the key topics, and we did have to leave some topics out, but that's not to say that they weren't important, but due to sort of our limited resources in terms of time, we chose not to prioritise some issues. So we'd be very interested in people's feedback about what you think might be missing and what could be potential future topics to include. And as Alison said, we felt a lot was already known about obesity, so there wasn't a big emphasis on this, but we also wanted to focus on what were the positive food components. Together with ANA, we wanted to show the large number of public health and nutrition issues in addition to obesity, so things like the micronutrients, and we also wanted to underpin the way forward with a strong focus on socioeconomic determinants of health, as Alison has covered. So of course, there's a lot of crossover too between some of the topics as well. So specific issues like fluoride and dental health were left out, as we felt this was quite a huge piece of work in its own right. We also didn't want, as I said, the final document to be too huge and therefore shelved. We aimed for a shorter version that contained key information that was in a usable format for you. We did include a short section on workforce development, as we felt this was something that had declined over time. There used to be a distance nutrition course that was offered by the Open Polytech and courses run by Toi Tangata. But this, as I said, has declined. So another thing that we're conscious of too is that there wasn't widespread cultural consultation. The aim was to document key issues for the sector, and one of the key findings was the totality of evidence around disparities for Māori and Pacific populations. And the next steps are going to be really vital to address that.
Thank you. I think we started doing a bit of a stock take at the same time and then decided that that was a whole nother project in itself, wasn't it? So this is just the start of something that that could lead to a number of additional projects or a number of additional consultations, discussion documents. We're really keen to find out what our readers would like next. So collecting this data was quite a challenge, given that there really isn't a lot of data there. Sally, I wonder if you could tell us, you're a bit of an expert in collecting data. How did you go about doing that?
Well, as you'd already mentioned, we began with a list of 25 nutrition topics, but we soon realised that the purpose was not to write a textbook. So we really needed to make sure that we chose topics that had evidence from them and that we went to the key documents from readily available sources. So the purpose is to outline the current situation in Aotearoa and describe at a population level. And I think that's important. So we're not going into clinical, this is population health. So we tried to be comprehensive, but some areas there just isn't information. And for some areas they're still emerging, like the microbiome, we acknowledge is important, but there just isn't evidence at a population level to include that at the moment. As we all know, our nutrition surveys are very old, and this was one of our biggest challenges. Some of the evidence in there is older than what we would like it to be, but we just don't have that up-to-date information. I mean, we know that food supply and eating patterns have changed considerably, so it's not necessarily reflected when we're having to use old survey data. And that is one of the key actions recommended in the paper. So these papers are intended to be discussion starters, and we would really welcome input from other people working in this field. Is there anything that we've missed that there is evidence on? Is there any key research that we've missed? So please get in touch with us or Alison, or add to the Q&A if you've got any other topics that you think should be in there.
Thank you. Just a bit of a technical issue. Just wondering, Peter, had somebody just text in to say that they can't see our faces, and just wondering, Marg, if you could check out that our faces are on the screen, and perhaps if you could comment in the questions and answers if that's a technical issue happening at our end or somebody else's end. Thank you. So these papers really do cover such a lot of content, and yet they don't offer any solutions. I've alluded to the fact that because if we had the solutions, I guess we wouldn't have the problems. Why didn't we look at what's actually happening to address the problems?
Well, I think we had to start somewhere, so addressing the issues is the first step, and we acknowledge that the next step will be to address the solutions. I mean, this was a bit hard for Leanne and I because we, always thinking of solutions, but we held back and just looked at the content. But I really hope that this paper will prompt discussion and advocacy about why we need solutions.
Thanks, Sally. And being such a comprehensive document, pulling everything together, I'm just quite amazed that actually we haven't had anything like this before. ANA is often asked what's the nutritional status of people living in Aotearoa, and it's been quite embarrassing that we haven't actually been able to answer that. Why do you think that nobody's done this before?
Well, as you said at the beginning, ANA has put their own resource into this. So, there's always the resourcing issue. And nutrition has really fallen off the radar since the demise of Healthy Eating, Healthy Action in 2009. So some of you may be have been around for some of the other times when nutrition was on the radar. But it is a bit of a hobby horse of mine about how we don't, why this hasn't happened in the past. So for those of you that don't remember HEHA, Helen Clark's Labor government introduced it in 2003. And as part of doing this, Leanne and I actually went back and had a look at the documents. There was a strategy and an implementation plan and evaluation, and we were really impressed by them and quite saddened that they were discontinued. So when the national government came in 2008, they dropped HEHA and many of the programs that were with it. So I was working as a public health nutritionist in my local region at the time of HEHA, and the amount of activity at a national and a local level, was fantastic. So you could see how it was working, but it, didn't really have enough time to work properly or to be evaluated well. And some of you might even remember even further back, between 1993 and 1995, we had a Public Health Commission, and they developed a nutrition strategy. But of course, once the commission disappeared, so did the strategy. And so we do have a history of sometimes having strategies, and often they involve stock takes as well, but then they're discontinued due to political influence. We had a childhood obesity plan under the previous national government, but that was really bringing together existing interventions, and it lacked the strategic oversight that is really needed. And it didn't consider the wider food environment or socio-economic factors. Now, we've got a great nutrition team at the Ministry of Health, but their role is to focus on policy advice, so things like eating guidelines, specific issues like vitamin D, guidance for schools, etc., as well as standards like the nutrient reference values. These are all really valuable information, but there's need for more resourcing for nutrition within the ministry, so they can go further and they can develop some of the policy work that's needed for some of the solutions.
That's fabulous, and I see that KPMG are taking the lead on creating a food strategy for New Zealand, and one of the things that we would really love to see is that it becomes food and nutrition So that's another discussion point at another time. I'm really pleased to, at the beginning of the webinar, just before everybody joined, both of you were able to tell me that you'd already started using the papers, and it's really great that these are not sitting on a shelf collecting dust. Can you just tell us a little bit about how you're actually using the papers, or potentially how you think others could use the papers?
Sure. So first of all, I think it would be really useful as a reference document for public health nutrition work, and Sally and I have already been using it for this purpose. We've been putting together a submission for Food Standards Australia New Zealand, and we've been able to utilise the data straight away. The fact that it's all collated in one key place makes it really, really easy to access. Other ways that you might like to use it are for advocacy. So this might be advocacy for public health nutrition in your local region, or perhaps even within your own organisation. You might be preparing proposals for new public health initiatives, and you might be looking for some statistics around some of the long-term conditions. You might also use it for professional development. If you're new to the public health nutrition sector, this document pulls together that sort of key information that could update you on what's happening in public health nutrition and, as Alison said, the nutrition status of New Zealanders. So I guess we're not trying to replace existing sources, but simply collating key information together in one place for the sector.
And I think there's a wide range of uses that you've just alluded to, Leanne. Thank you for that. And I'm sure people would love to hear what other people are doing with them, or what they think they could do with the document. We encourage you to, if you would like us to send the document to anybody, somebody, there might be an MP in your region, or perhaps somebody that you would like to influence, we'd be more than happy to do that on your behalf. So please just let us know. I think it's been impossible to cover absolutely everything that we would have wanted to cover. What additional information, just briefly, do you think that might be useful in the future to cover?
Okay, so after the documents have received sort of comment and feedback and discussion, I'm sure that additional issues will be apparent. And, you know, as we've already said, you know, it'd be really great to hear from the sector about what you feel could be included. As we've said, there's been topics that we didn't include for a variety of reasons, like dental health and nutrition misinformation. That was a topic that we were quite keen to address. And as Sally said, emerging issues like the microbiome, and we've only briefly touched on things like sustainability and food systems. I think following on from this document, we would really love to do a stock take of what is actually happening out there, because we know that there is quite a lot of initiatives happening, and we would really like to look at sort of the evidence of what does work, and both of these would flow on to a national nutrition strategy. So I guess we aim to highlight the breadth of public health and nutrition issues, including obesity, but not only obesity.
Thank you. And I think one of the things that we don't know a lot about is what's happening with the population shifting to a plant-based eating plan, and protein, iron, calcium intakes, will they be affected, or micronutrients like vitamin B12, particularly in young women. So there's a lot more research that would be quite valuable. I wonder if there was anything in this research that surprised the two of you.
Okay, so I guess overall, you know, having been working in the sector for quite a long time, we were generally aware of the issues that we wanted to cover. However, I guess seeing the sort of totality of the evidence and the breadth of sort of gaps and the lack of recent data to utilise, it was more than surprising. It was actually quite alarming, and I think that Sally and I sort of both experienced that as we were looking through the various topics. So I guess just more specifically, some areas that surprised us were, the fact that New Zealanders' intake of vegetables and fruit is declining. When you look back to 2006, 2007. So this is, of great concern. It seems to also be quite a lack of evidence around our micronutrients. Many of the studies that have been done are quite small, and there really isn't a big body of evidence in these areas, and particularly for when there's been issues shown for subgroups of the population. So iron intake among young children, iodine intake among breastfeeding women and their babies. As I've previously mentioned, training opportunities in nutrition for non-university courses or community-based courses for those working in the community have been declining. So those opportunities are just not there anymore. The only community-based regular training that's available now is that's provided by Pacific Island Heartbeat. These findings, combined with a lack of coordinated direction for the sector, as well as considering the emerging issues that are coming out, makes these documents very timely, and we hope will raise awareness of the gaps. We're doing this together with a lot of other organisations like the Health Coalition, Aotearoa, and other non-government organisations like the Cancer Society. So these are, we're saying similar things to these other organisations, which is hopefully adding weight to the need for some action in public health nutrition.
Thanks, Leanne. So some of this is quite concerning to hear as an organisation. Sally's just sharing a few slides now on, and Sally, the first one that you're sharing is about the key findings for the research. So I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about what you think the key findings were.
Yeah, so we've touched on quite a few of these already. We know about food insecurity and income spent on housing and the need for cultural factors, and Jeff is going to talk more about those both. We know that we lack information, but we do have enough information to know that we have pretty unhealthy eating patterns, and we do have good information about our low vegetable intake. We know we have high obesity. Through some of the work we've done at University of Auckland and some other universities, we do know our food environments are pretty unhealthy, and our packaged food supply is high in energy, sodium and added sugar. Another part of the issue is that some of our policy interventions are voluntary, not mandatory, like the Health Star rating and marketing restrictions, so they're really not as effective as they could be. We've talked about the micronutrients. In New Zealand, we have high rates of initiating breastfeeding, but low rates of exclusive breastfeeding until 6 months. So there's some more work to be done to explore why that happens, and tied in with the early introduction of solids. I think we're learning more about the nutritional risk in older people, and places like Massey University and the Lilac study are contributing to that, but it's certainly an emerging area. We've talked about micronutrients, and Leanne's talked about the lack of research on nutrition workforce development.
There's a lot there that we could spend a lot more time delving into. Really interested to hear your comments, questions and answers for those that are watching the recording. If you are surprised, shocked, expected perhaps us to find this. Coming out of this, what are the key recommendations that you think should happen?
Well, the first one is not surprising. We really need to strengthen food and nutrition monitoring. We need surveys on what we're eating, what our nutrient status is, and food security, and making sure we collect enough data for our priority population groups and for our ages across the life course as well. And we need this so that our policies and our interventions are appropriate for our food supply and our food environment. And as we've said before, we need to develop a national nutrition survey, and in the webinar next week, I'm going to talk more about this, so I might just leave it there.
Yeah, so none of this is new. A lot of groups and experts are saying the same thing, aren't they?
They are,
There's,
yeah.
I would like to just ask you both, if you, or maybe you don't need to both say the answer to this, but if you were the Prime Minister, what would you be doing with this document if it landed on your desk?
Well, for me, it goes back to what Jeff said at the beginning, is that we really need adequate income to allow autonomy over food choices. And if we get that right, then we can, it's a lot easier to put the other things into place.
As Sally and Alison have said, we desperately need the National Nutrition Survey across the life course with a sector-wide national nutrition strategy to follow. So that's what I would, really push for.
Excellent. I wonder, why is it so important to have this nutrition survey? Do either of you have a comment on that? Surely we know the issues behind why. So what is it that we actually want to find out from a nutrition survey?
Well, we do things like fortify our food supply. So it's important that we know what we're actually eating to be able to do that. And we really need to, if we want to have policies and interventions, we need to be able to know what we're eating so that we're intervening in the right place and we're intervening with the right population groups. And I think with the emerging evidence or emerging towards plant-based diets, we have no idea how many people are already eating plant-based diets, how many people are vegan or vegetarian. So we need to know what's happening to be able to know how to help the population with that transition to eating more plant-based foods.
So we're putting a lot of money into programs and interventions, but we're actually not really sure what we're even measuring in the first place, are we?
That's right.
Yeah, it goes back to that original quote that I said. If you don't know what you're monitoring, then you don't know what you're going to get, do you? I think it's certainly been an interesting process putting these papers together, and I really encourage our viewers that are watching today to ask some questions. What would you like to ask our authors, Sally and Leanne, while they're here? What would you like to ask ANA? How do you think you might use this information? There's a lot of rich information on the ANA website. There's an executive summary, then there are the 3 separate documents, and then there is the whole thing all together. There's also a press release, and as I said, we've printed a limited number of hard copies as well. So if you would like us to send them out, then we would be delighted to do that. I think it's been quite an interesting experience doing this project too over COVID-19, hasn't it? And it was our original aim to actually make this a bit of an election issue and to have it all out before election, but then we changed plan and pivoted a bit and decided that actually now's a really good time to release it, as we've got new health ministers, new government, and this is our very strong call to action. So there's a couple more questions here about a nutrition strategy. What would you like to see as a leading thing happening in a nutrition strategy? How would we go about doing that?
Well, as you mentioned, KPMG are starting to look at a food strategy. So I agree with you that it's really important that we make sure that health is an outcome with that strategy as well and is considered. Because we don't want to have lots of strategies, we just want one strategy. Because that is part of the problem, is that lack of coordination and cohesion. When we did our food EPI, which is an assessment of the food environment, and we get public health experts to come up with recommendations, we also did a map where we looked at the government entities that could be involved in policy recommendations around food. And we came up with about 31 government entities. So, we always think of health and education and primary industries, but there's a lot more organisations or entities that can also influence policy. But we have no coordinating body. We don't have one ministry that looks after all of that. And I think that's why that, they're forgetting trade might be a goal for one ministry, health another, education for another, and we need to bring all that together.
That's a really great point. There's a question here. Somebody's asking where are these papers? These papers are sitting on the homepage of the ANA website, www.ana.org.nz. They, while they're on the homepage at the moment, once they are removed from the homepage, they will move into the knowledge translation, or I think it's called evidence snapshots section on the website. So take a look at those papers there. There's a couple of other questions here. Sally and Leanne, what are you going to be talking about in the next webinar next week?
Okay, so I think we've highlighted around 6 topics that we'd like to talk about. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about dietary patterns, around more fruit and vegetables, with a focus on what we can eat more of, and we'd also like to weave in a little bit around mental health, as that's sort of a growing area of interest in nutrition. I'd also like to touch on the micronutrients, which I've mentioned a little bit today, to sort of dive into those a little bit more, and also dive into the area of workforce and around the lack of nutrition training, particularly for people working out in our communities with people in need.
And then I want to talk about the food and nutrition strategy, which we've touched on quite a lot today. More about plant-based diets, because that's definitely a growing area of interest. And given my research areas and my passion for healthy food environments, share some of my thoughts and some of our research around that as well.
Thank you. We look forward to hearing more about that next week. There's a comment here from a school teacher who said that she thinks this would be fabulous for a number of areas of the curriculum within the education sector. So that's great. And another question is, why isn't gut micro mentioned in the papers? Is there about the good and the bad bugs in the gut?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely an area that, we would have liked to have included, but I guess, through our sort of prioritisation process, it was something that moved to the bottom of the list. But also we felt that the evidence is still really sort of emerging at the moment. And so, we wanted to sort of wait to see where when there was a little bit more evidence to maybe include that. But, certainly if we get comment from the sector, it would be certainly something that we could include in the future.
So I think that's one of the very strong messages about this document, is that it is all evidence-based, and that's what ANA loves to collect. We love to collect the evidence, and it's now over to you as our viewers and the sector to work out how you can best put this document into use. We'd be delighted to hear from you, delighted to have a conversation with you, really interested in your discussion about the content of this document. Sally and Leanne, it's been fabulous to have you on board with us this morning. Thank you very much for sharing your wisdom, and we're just very delighted that you have been able to commit your time and energy and patience to delivering such a very useful booklet on behalf of the wider sector. Thank you very much. We look forward to talking to you next week. To our listeners that have been listening today, ka kite anō.